Sports Guide. This week, join Bobby as he speaks with Colin Williams of New Era ADR about the establishment of a relatively new ADR program, how it operates, and the growing use of ADR in the sports world.
Alternative dispute resolution was originally promoted as offering a swift, effective alternative to the court system. Yet, for many, it's become just as slow, acrimonious, costly, and painful. Complex procedures and outdated processes often lead to escalating expenses and strained relationships. But what if there was a better way? Welcome to New Era ADR, where dispute resolution meets innovation. Our progressive approach delivers the most efficient and cost-effective solutions, tailored to your needs, all with flat fees and no hourly billing. Guided by industry experts and supported by cutting-edge technology, join us in defining a new standard for dispute resolution that empowers you to achieve a fair and efficient outcome. Welcome to a new era of ADR.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 83 of Sports Shorts. I'm your host, Bobby Hacker, and I'm very happy today to have as our guest Colin Williams, the founder and chairman of New Era ADR, a proud SLA sponsor. Hey, Colin.
Hey, thanks for having me, Bobby. Appreciate it.
Oh, love to have you. Obviously, everyone in our world knows that the judicial process is a glacial pace of dispute resolution, and your organization and others have really stepped forward over the last 20 years, really, in the industry to provide another means of sort of extrajudicial resolution of disputes. And you guys are a fairly new player in the market. So we'd like to start with a little information, which is to talk about you as our guest. So tell us what your role is with your company, with New Era ADR. What's your day-to-day?
That's a really interesting question. So as founder and chairman, I'm not CEO. Rich Lee is a very, very competent guy, a great colleague. He's running the business sort of on a day-to-day. For me, a lot of what my day-to-day comes down to is there's sales, there's information, there's content creation. It's basically just getting the word out. As you mentioned, we're new, but we're not that new anymore. We just hit our third anniversary in April. So, we've crossed the point that a lot of startups don't cross. So we're very, very happy with that. But at the end of the day, it's still about getting the word out and letting people know that there's something different and new out there. We kind of look at it as being the Uber and Lyft of the ADR industry. So there's definitely some very established, very good players in the industry that do things very well. We just do things in a very different way. We're technology enabled. And we're basically a technology company. So in a lot of ways, we're very, very different. Like I said, it's kind of the Uber Lyft analogy. And for me, it's really getting the word out there and creating content and meeting people and talking to people so they know about us.
Well, how is it that you ended up in this world, in this industry? What's the path? What's your professional path that led you to this stop?
Sure. Well, I've been an attorney now for 21 years, which is just appalling, but it is what it is. I started out.
You're a rookie at 21 years. Come on.
Yeah. It seems like law school is yesterday. This is a terrible analogy, but my dad and uncle have always said life's like a roll of toilet paper. It spins faster as you get towards the end. And that's kind of how I feel sometimes. But yeah, an attorney for 21 years. I started out doing sort of the traditional route. I was a law firm attorney, spent close to 10 years at Greenberg Traurig in Chicago doing labor and employment litigation, bankruptcy litigation, commercial litigation, lots of litigation. Ended up going to Oracle, leaving the firm and going to Oracle because I wanted to get involved in technology. So spent 2 years at Oracle when the cloud computing division was getting built up to compete with the AWSs and the Microsofts and the Googles of the world. So that was really interesting, sort of learn technology from the inside out. And then I spent 2 years as general counsel, not 2 years. I was a general counsel at two different technology companies. One of them cratered in the most spectacular of ways. That's a whole other story and would take this entire episode up. And then my last one was one called Reverb.com, which was basically David called, I apologize, but eBay for musical instruments, to keep this in the simplest way possible. But going through all my experiences as an attorney, both as an outside attorney and an in-house attorney, I was just overwhelmingly frustrated with the litigation process. And I thought it was too expensive, too time consuming, too inefficient. And the reality is, that works for certain disputes. But there's this other side of disputes where there's really not that much complexity, right? Let's just say you've got two parties, they don't agree. At the end of the day, what it really requires is somebody to step in, listen to the stories, and say, I believe you and I don't believe you, and move on with your life. So, what I wanted to create was really a forum that was based on that was based on the storytelling and not sort of the game playing. We didn't want to have tons of rules and procedures. We didn't want people to sort of slog their way through the process. We really wanted to get to the point where you talk to somebody and say, hey, this is what happened. And the other side gets a chance to say the same thing. And that person says, all right, well, here's the decision. Move on with your life, right? Because particularly as an in-house attorney, you're not making money your business isn't making money by litigating. It's losing money by litigating. So you really need to get back to the things that drive revenue for the business and the things that are important to the business. And litigation can really, really distract from that. So that was kind of the impetus behind the business, was doing something different, more efficient, less expensive, much faster.
So you said that, and I liked how you phrased it, that you're really more of a tech company.
Yeah.
And from your background, you sort of learned from a giant, a couple of startups. Now you're in your own startup. The process of building one of these out, we're looking at a tech company. So did you follow the standard tech company route of going to the venture guys to fund this and start a series of funding ventures to get this thing launched?
Really good question. We started, which was probably a pretty traditional route, but we just started talking to friends, right? So it's funny, we did a pre-seed, a seed, and now I guess we're looking at we don't know if we'll do an A or not. We may not have to, and that would be great. But we just started talking to people who had experienced litigation and saying, we want to do this in a different way. And we were pretty surprised by the immediate reaction, the immediate positivity, and people who said, yeah, I want to fund this. And I do specifically, we had a venture firm, Motivate Ventures out of Chicago, who put in money extraordinarily early. And really, when this was just an idea, and I give them a hell of a lot of credit. They're just fantastic people. But, they said, we don't usually just bet on ideas. There has to be something that exists. And we really didn't have anything. We just had an idea. And so I remember when we crossed right about $600,000 or $700,000 money raised, and thought, wow, this is actually a thing. I think we can do this. We can actually pay people. So that was how it started out. We now, in our seed round, we had additional venture firms come on. We have 4 venture firms involved. Jump Capital, Nextview Ventures, Alumni Ventures, and Motivate. And we're grateful to all of them. So we have gone a little bit of the traditional route of fundraising, but I will say that friends and family was really enlightening. When you see people who are really passionate about bad experiences they've had and willingness to back what they think will be a better experience.
So when you call yourself a tech company, in what way does that differentiate from the other players in this market? Is it how you access your company's information? Is it the pay structure? Is it all of the above? Is it more?
So we build all our own tech. So I would say that a lot of players in the industry sort of, and this isn't good, bad, or indifferent. I'm not here to knock anybody and how they do things. But there's a cobbling together of technology, right? And that can be a function of the arbitrator or the mediator, what they're comfortable using. Maybe they love Outlook and they love different parts of Google and Dropbox and different things. And so each proceeding will inherently be different because what the arbitrator wants to use. We actually build all our own platforms in-house. And our goal is for our platforms to take you from A to Z through the entire process, to do everything with the exception of video conferencing. We're not out to build new video conferencing software. That would be an awful decision. But beyond that, we can do all the other stuff, which includes communication, calendaring, sort of the DocuSign function, building the decisions. We can package everything up in a bow and hand it to you at the end of the case. But the reality is everything is uniform, no matter how many proceedings you do, because we're building all that tech. So we have our own engineering team. We're SOC 2. We don't offshore anything. And the goal is, even beyond ADR, we think there's opportunity to do other things that are tech enabled in the legal industry. And we want to be able to do those things. So, but in the ADR realm, it's really building all our own platforms and facilitating the process in a way that we think works. And it's not taking different pieces and different softwares and building something that the next proceeding might be completely different.
So if I'm utilizing your services and I call and say, I'd like to, utilize your services and I like to use this video conferencing platform and I want my documents through this function, you can go, sure, and create that environment so it's not wed to a specific New Era tech.
We could, we would convince you otherwise. And the only reason being is that we want to make it really simple. And the reality is when everything is in one spot, everything is simpler, right? So if you can just go to your dashboard, pull up a case, and literally everything that's happened in that case is there, your deadlines, your reminders, everything, all the documents. And even if when the case is over, if you could go to your dashboard and find everything that happened in the case, then you're not trying to say, well, where did that document get uploaded? Was that in Dropbox? Did they send that to me in an email? There's inefficiencies that are created in that sort of ad hoc process. And that's what we're fighting against, inefficiency at every level. So what we would say is, I mean, we could let you upload things to Dropbox, but why? Wouldn't you rather have all your documents in the same spot as all your communications, all your emails, whatever it may be? So each time you need to find something in that case, you're not scrambling. It's all in one spot.
Now, with respect to the panel, I'm sure you have a panel of neutrals that you utilize. How does that work? How does that selection process work? And are there any differences in accessing your list of neutrals versus other available opportunities for ADR services?
Yeah, it's we don't have our list up on the website. We're figuring out what we think is the best way to do that because, quite frankly, it's growing so quickly that it would be a job just to rehash that every day and figure out who enters. So the reality is, when we started, it was very, very difficult to get neutrals who were interested. We met a guy named Darren Lee, who's at the National Academy of Distinguished Neutrals, which has a very, very high bar for being admitted to that trade organization. And he said, hey, if you guys have cases, let me know and I'll send it out to my panels or to my members and I'll get you neutrals. And we were extraordinarily fortunate that he was interested in helping us at that time. And we're still in contact with Darren. We love him. But the reality is now we've got a bunch of incoming and we've got a bunch of people who are interested in being on the panel. I think we're close to 100 neutrals signed to independent contractor agreements. And that's growing, like I said, by the day. And what we're looking for in those panels is diversity. And when I say diversity, that's not just gender and race. That's diversity of experience. That's diversity of the ability to use technology. That's diversity of age. We really believe that the best way to create good outcomes is if you have panels that look like the population in general, because they're going to be better able to decide what's happening in this world. And the truth is, I could pick up my iPhone. Everybody's used to running their life through an iPhone. So we believe that we need neutrals to really understand that world and the disputes that arise out of it.
So if I'm in a dispute and I say, let me check out New Era. I have let's step away from sports.
Sure.
A dispute with my neighbor, for example, which is a real common problem that should never have to clog the judicial system. Seems to me that's like a classic one. So I would go to you. What's the process of getting me to selecting that neutral to hear my case?
Yep. We have a rank and strike process. So right now what we would do, and we're working on algorithmic ways to actually make this even more efficient. If you can't tell, that's the word I'm going to keep coming back to. But we will create a panel of 8 neutrals. You'll each get a strike, and then you'll rank your neutrals and it's all in the platform. It's literally drag and drop. So you'll rank your neutrals in your order, and whatever the neutral that's ranked the highest in both lists, that's the one that will be chosen. So it's kind of a traditional process. It's definitely tech enabled, but at the end of the day, we're giving you a panel. We're giving you options. We want to make sure that you have options, and that's how the case will proceed.
Now, in going over your website, which I looked at a little bit, good website, good information. One of the questions I was curious about, and I don't need granular detail, but how does the pricing work? Because it seems it's different than the traditional models in terms of how I'm going to the you know determining what the cost of this case might be. So can you talk to us a little bit about that model, because it seems pretty unique?
Yes, it's cost certainty. One of the things that we think is most important. I always view this as there's three cash registers that are all ringing as you're going through ADR, and one is your attorney's fees, one is the platform fees, and one is the arbitrator fees. We do everything on a flat fee basis. Everything. We do not invoice. We do not bill by the hour. We determine what kind of case it is, and it's a flat fee. We have other pricing models, subscription, volume pricing, but once again, it's all flat fees. We don't bill any hours. We don't submit any invoices. So the reason we do that, number one, is when we get back to that concept of cost efficiency. When we were in-house attorneys, all the folks on the team who are attorneys, the one thing we wanted in the case was, I can't just not know what this is going to cost. I can't go to my CFO and say, I'm thinking maybe this is what it's going to be, and then it turns out to be $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 more expensive. That's not a fun conversation to have. So the way we think about it is two of those cash registers we can control, right? And so we want you to have cost certainty with respect to those two cash registers. The other part about a flat fee, though, is it encourages efficiency. So if a neutral is getting paid one flat fee, regardless of how long the case takes, guess what? There's no incentive for that case to take a long time. So we want them to be efficient. We want them to work hard. We want them to get to a decision, because at the end of the day, there's no incentive to continue to drag this case out. So yes, it's very different from, I think, and it's not just traditional ADR providers. This is an industry that's run by the billable hour, right? And that's still the case. So we want to be part of the movement away from the billable hour.
Well, I think, you and I both experienced it, having been private firm lawyers and then in-house lawyers. And the difference is the granular existence of an in-house lawyer. And then all of a sudden, a private practice lawyer, when you go in-house, you're not keeping time. You're just getting stuff done. You're accomplishing goals. And it seems to me that you've taken that lesson and applied it to the ADR model, which I think the public is going to love, and makes it a really interesting concept. But one of the things you mentioned a few minutes ago were, I think you said subscription and flat fee model. Does that apply to getting a client, let's say XYZ Corporation, and signing a deal with them and saying, we'll handle all of this for you? Or how do your subscription and flat fee basis work?
Yeah, it's so when you do subscriptions or volume pricing, that's when you tend to know that I'm going to have X amount of disputes over the course of a year, right? So what we're encouraging you to do is then to subsidize the cost of that stuff up front in exchange for a discount. And the reality is, even though it's a corporation that's subsidizing that amount, it drops the cost for everybody. So if you're a plaintiff or an employee who has a case, if all the costs are dropped, and that's by virtue of the actual company or whatever it may be subsidizing that cost, everybody wins. So those models fit really, really well if you have a fairly predictable amount of litigation. If you're a smaller company and you say, I don't know what I've got, then we can do discounts off of the rack pricing, the ad hoc models, and that's totally fine. We're happy to do that because that fits. But if you tend to know over the course of the past 3 years, I've had 90 disputes for the past 3 years, right? So it would benefit me if I could get a discount on that pricing by paying in advance, because I'm fairly certain it's going to be around those numbers this coming year. So we want to facilitate that. And once again, by dropping the price for everybody, we're benefiting everybody.
So in the sports industry, I imagine that there are, if certainly among the leagues, but it would seem to me under member clubs to professional sports teams, that they have some regular labor and employment issues and would seem to be a good target for your business. Is that something you guys have delved deeply into?
Yeah, we actually have our first sports team on board. So we do the Chicago Cubs disputes. And it is funny when you sort of have the outside view of what we do. I think a lot of people commonly think that we do the player disputes, right? Salary arbitrations, that type of thing. The reality is how we look at the sports industry is a big group of corporations. So they tend to have the same type of disputes that any other corporation has, whether that's a vendor dispute, whether or not it's a slip and fall, whether or not it's an employment dispute. And that's the stuff that we're handling, right? And that's the stuff that we're interested in handling. We know there's a process, there's collective bargainings, there's unions, there's processes in place for determining salary arbitrations and all sorts of things like that. We're not looking to play in that sphere right now unless, people ask us to. But the reality is all those sports teams, their business is just like anything else. And we can really facilitate and make things easier for the stuff that all businesses have issues with.
Well, that seems really interesting. Have you, as part of what you said, you're out there selling. So are you reaching out to, now that you've got one team on board, is that helping grease the skids to get into other teams? Are you thinking about going to leagues? Where do you see the path of your company? Because I think it's an interesting model, and it's always getting that, in any business, getting that first customer in is how you get customers 2 through infinity.
Yes. Yeah, it's I think we're still so new in the sphere that, like I said, it's still about getting the word out, making people aware that we're out here, that there's a different way to do things. So the answer is, I don't know. I'm talking to as many humans as I possibly can, whether that's a league, a team, it doesn't really matter. Other sports organizations, manufacturers, whatever it may be. We're not entirely sure what the problems are that need to be solved. So I'm learning on a constant basis. And I think as we learn more from the Cubs, then that will make probably our pitch a little bit easier to other sports teams. But at the end of the day, like I said, we're so new, we're still figuring this stuff out. What we do know is that, like I said, every organization has at least a common set of problems, whether that's employment, once again, vendor disputes, licensing, whatever it may be. Those are the things we can solve, that we know we can solve. There may be other things that we can help solve that we don't know about. And at the end of the day, what's really important too is while we're dealing with the organizations, we want to be as fair as humanly possible to the plaintiff, to the consumer, to the employee. At the end of the day, we don't know who they are, so we can't have a conversation with them until a dispute starts. But at the end of the day, that's important to us too. So the minute a dispute is actually initiated, we want to make sure that both sides get as fair a shake as humanly possible. And even though it's the organizations that we're talking to on the front end of it, that once again, that's to make sure that everything's subsidized and the costs are low for everybody. But we really, really want to make sure that the employee, the consumer, they're having a fair shake in this whole process too.
Which creates a whole other interesting scenario. You sign company A, and they say, we want to use you for our dispute resolution services outside of the traditional judicial process. Have you found it difficult to get the other party that's not your client to buy into the system? Have you been finding that they're going, wait, I know what it's going to cost, and then does that help the buy-in?
Really good question. I mean, at the end of the day, we're typically a creature of contract, right? So whether or not somebody's read the terms and conditions or the employment contract or not, we obviously hope they do. But if we're in there, then both parties have agreed. Now, I will say we have had people who have come to us and said, look, I've got XYZ in my agreement, but I'd really rather use you guys. The issue will be that I need to make sure that the other side agrees. The first thing we tell them is send them our way. Let's have a conversation, because I need to explain, or anybody in the team need to explain why we can make their experience better too. And I don't want anybody thinking that we're biased or bad things are happening, anything nefarious. I want them to understand that, sure, maybe we've had a conversation with this organization prior to talking to you. Maybe they've said, yes, we definitely want to use you. But I want to explain to you firsthand why we're good for you too. And I think when people have those conversations, it actually becomes very easy to say, yeah, let's do this. This sounds like a better way to go.
Now, other players in your industry, we'll call it an industry, I think that's what it's becoming.
Sure. Why not?
And those groups have different sets of rules for different kinds of disputes. Do you guys have a similar model?
We do not. And it's actually part of our model that we don't. We have a general set of rules and procedures. But what I will tell you, when I was litigating, I always viewed the judge and the arbitrator as a referee, right? And what I want them to do is be a player in the game, because the judge and the arbitrator are making the ultimate decision. So to me, it matters less what the two parties believe that they need to see. And what matters more is what the person who's making the decision believes they need to see. So we really want our arbitrators and our mediators driving the process and saying, look, I don't need you to send out 100 requests for production, 85,000 interrogatories that don't have any relation to what I need to make a decision. So what we find is when you overdo the rule books, you give the opportunity to say, well, I'm just going to go file all these motions and do all this discovery because I have the right to do that. And so what we want is a broader set of rules and procedures that really put everything in the hands of the arbitrator to say, look, here's what I need to see. It doesn't matter that you think you need to see every email from 1970 on forward, even though there's no email in 1970. But whenever email started, back when I was in college, I guess, in the 90s, that you think you need to see every email from 1990 forward. That's irrelevant to my decision making. What I need to see is the emails that are relevant to this particular dispute. So that's what we're going to produce. That's what everybody's going to see. But I do think when you create really, really massive rule books, you open the door to say, let's just drag this process out and let's ask for everything under the sun and let's produce everything under the sun and let's file 10,000 motions. And to me, that doesn't get to the crux of the storytelling.
Well, that's really refreshing. I know in my experience as a lapsed litigator such as I am, had a mediation once, room full of people, and we agreed on the mediator, and he sat there in front of the room and he said, basically, I am God. These are my rules. I'm setting it up. We're going to solve the problem. And like 10 hours later, 14 parties and claimants on both sides, and it was all settled. Because it was, he didn't suffer fools, and he said, no, we're here to solve a problem. And in caucuses, he was shutting down people, saying, I don't need to hear that. That's not the point. Did your guy do this? Yes. Did he, And so I think your model gets to that, because I think part of the frustration that exists in dispute resolutions of any kind is the very process. And I think ADR grew because the judicial process became such a burdensome mother may I universe that it wasn't really fair, because no offense to big law firms, but they could crush sole practitioners, made it very difficult. This seems, what you've created here is a much more equitable proposition, and old style common law courts of equity that seem to be just telling a story and having somebody decide what's what, which I think is more palatable and has to cut the costs of the dispute resolution for corporations for sure.
I think that's absolutely right. Once again, though, we're trying to cut costs for absolutely everybody. But I would be terrified if I had a arbitrator or mediator ever said, I'm actually God in this scenario. But that is exactly how we want the process to run, which is we're hiring you for a reason, right? It's because of your expertise, your experience, all these different things. You run the process, get us to a resolution. At the end of the day, the two sides just bickering back and forth and pushing paper and stuff is not going to get to a resolution. You need to have that arbitrator as a player in the game. They need to be running the process. So everything you said is just spot on. That's exactly how we want proceedings to run. We want the arbitrator, the mediator, grabbing a hold of the reins and saying, here's how it's going to go. And I don't need to hear all this ancillary stuff. I need to hear the story, and I'm going to make a decision, and you're going to move on with your life.
And so I assume that your clients on the corporate side or the team side are in that little lovely paragraph that all us lawyers see. It lists, you go to New Era ADR, not any other players. This is who we're using.
Correct. And you actually touched on something that I just popped back in my head. We believe that when you insert an ADR provision, you want to do something that's fundamentally different than court. If the ADR process looks exactly like court, then you're not getting the benefit of the bargain, right? So if you have a process outside that the only thing you get out of it is confidentiality, but the reality is it takes longer and it's just as expensive or more expensive than court, and the process looks exactly like court, then what exactly did you do? We look at the term alternative dispute resolution and believe it should be an alternative. You were choosing to do something different, so it should look different. We don't want our process to resemble court. And that's not that there's anything wrong with court. I'm not ripping court. Judges are great, but they are overburdened, they're overworked, their dockets are crazy. So there's all sorts of stuff going on. If I say I want to go to New Era, then I'm doing that for a reason. And I don't want it to be the exact same thing that I would get in court.
Well, it sounds like you guys are building something special. It sounds like as we've developed ADR over the last many years in the judicial, in the legal profession, that you guys have worked towards building the better mousetrap. And I think that's something that everybody would embrace, because more and more people want to use these services and stay away from court. Civil disputes are, oftentimes, I hate to say it, he said, she said, or he said, or she said, she said, and let's just figure out what really happened. So
Yep.
I'm a big fan of it, and I think you guys have sort of are taking it to the next level, which is really interesting. And thank you for sharing the story with us today. Really appreciate it. And I think, as people look in on this, you might have a few more sales pitches to have to make. So really appreciate the time, appreciate you being a sponsor. It's been great chatting with you. And for our audience out there, if you've just found us, it's time for you to become, if you're not already, to become a member of the Sports Lawyers Association. So you can do that by going to sportslaw.org and becoming a member. In addition to all the free content we have, and then you can find here on our YouTube channel, for example, where this will be archived, there's a lot of other information behind our membership wall. So we urge you all to join. And once again, Colin, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's really been a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you guys for having us. We love SLA. It's been just an incredible organization. We're really grateful to be involved, and we're happy to support. And we look forward to what's coming in the future.
Great. Have a great day. Talk to you soon.
You too.